There are three basic areas that are circulated to fire rescue services. First one being multi-residential. We're looking at townhomes, row housing, walk-up apartments, high-rise, and assisted living facilities. That gets circulated to us for comment. As far as assemblies, we will look at normally any major assemblies, sports, church, community halls, hotels, motels, restaurants, or anything over a large size, over 600 meters squared as required by the building code. For industrial facilities, service stations, bulk fuel stations, hazardous materials, or again, anything over 600 meters squared, are some of the type of facilities that is circulated to fire rescue. Initially, our first comment is to ensure our emergency response and public safety are maintained. We want to make sure that we can get to the facility and that the public is safe, the occupants are safe, and the neighborhood is safe from the proposed development. Two things we look at are ensuring access to the property, access for emergency services, the public, and a high level of safety for the firefighters. Again, two principal components: emergency access for design and functional water supply. We need utilities to the site, primarily operational water supply to the building. When our fire prevention officer reviews this submission, we will respond back to the applicant in two forms. One with a condition, and a condition is something that we would require a response to prior to offering support for the proposal. The second one is an advisement. An advisement is basically information from fire rescue that we do not require response on. It's for additional information for future use or for information that you're going to require prior to your building permit or occupancy of the building. When we review fire access routes, we're reviewing the requirements out of the Alberta Building Code 3256 and, more importantly, the appendix from that section. Some of the things we look at are the turning facilities. So when we measure from the public thoroughfare to the principal entrance of the building, we're looking at the distance. If that distance is greater than 90 meters, we would require a turnaround. If the distance is greater than 120 meters, we require a second access to the property. The secondary access should be constructed of a minimum construction of a 3-meter wide concrete path, 6-meter right-of-way. 3-meter wide concrete path for the wheels of our vehicle to negotiate the access, 6-meter wide for accessibility for us to set up and stage to put out outriggers if necessary for access to a property. The last thing, and probably most important, is the swept path analysis or the turning radius, which we'll discuss further. The swept path analysis, and if we refer back to 32561 in the appendix of the building code, it talks about consulting the local fire authority. If you build an access road to 3256 with 6-meter wide roads, 12-meter centerline turning radius, etc., that doesn't necessarily mean that a fire or emergency vehicle can access that roadway. In the appendix, it states that consult the local fire authority prior to the design and construction of the access route. What we're finding is that in Edmonton, with the size of our vehicles, quite often the minimum requirements in the code do not allow for access to properties. Here's an example of a swept path analysis. And what we're looking for here is from the principal roadway, the public thoroughfare, if you can conduct a swept path, and the swept path, if we follow your red lines through the access route, the red lines graphically illustrate the boundaries of the truck, the front bumper, the front corners, the rear bumper, the rear each corner of the building. So that's the path that the physical dimensions of the vehicle take as they negotiate the access route. We're not necessarily looking for the wheels and where the wheels move down the roadway, but can the vehicle physically negotiate or move through that access route from the roadway throughout the complete access or to the principal entrance of the building. And in this representation, you can see how the red lines swing out as the bumpers swing out. They're not just two parallel lines, but they actually move and vary through the access route. Here's another representation to the left of this slide. Demonstrates the vehicle size of our aerial. We've got the overall length, overall width, and so these are dimensions that you're going to plug into your software to represent the swept path analysis. Here's another representation on the right where we've got 3 different access road designs. The blue lines illustrate one road, and if you see right on this corner here, This is a roadway that was designed with 6 meters wide, 12 meter center line, and this represents that the turning radius of the vehicle, we cannot negotiate this turn getting into the property. So this particular applicant showed a yellow access road and a red and a green access road, trying to find different paths into the principal entrance, which is on the east side of this building. So this is a good visual indication. Can that vehicle make that, can they negotiate that road into the building or not? When we talk about water supply, the fire code has a standata issued in 2009 that talks specifically about water supplies and access and how the two intermingle and how they provide the necessary components to respond to an emergency in a property. It talks about having the water supply dealt with at the development stage in consultation with the development, with other city departments prior to the subdivision approval, and ensuring that not just proposed water supply, but that the water supply is operational and sufficient for firefighting operations. This standata and all the standatas I refer to are available through Alberta Municipal Affairs. You can Google standatas, fire code standatas. In addition to the water supply, Article 5614, Access for Firefighting, sets out specific conditions for a fire department ability to ensure firefighting crews, equipment, apparatus can reach a construction or demolition site to effectively control fire. So what we're talking about is that we review the design of your access road, the water supply, but it's important to understand that for fire, we require this for construction. So if you need to reference the Fire Code 5614, that further explains the requirement during construction rather than just at the end stage. When we apply the fire code in reference to construction sites, it will include single-family residence, multifamily, commercial, any type of occupancy. The code has different requirements, but really they come down to 3 points. Provide the fire department unobstructed access to the site, unobstructed access to the building, unobstructed access to fire hydrants or other water supplies such as private water supplies, fire extinguishers on the property, fire department connections as you're building properties as they come out of the ground and are developed vertically. We need standpipes and water connections as you progress upwards. And then cooperation with the municipality. Can you ensure that the water supply is operational prior to your building construction? Here's an example of a site that has poor, very poor access to the property. So on the left, we have a drawing where we cannot access the building at all. And on the right, there's a diagram of a roadway that is not built to support our vehicles. Our vehicles require a temporary all-weather access road capable of supporting 85,000 pounds. As a summary of the access road and water supply, there are two code interpretations that you can use for a reference, but really water supply, access road. We also make comment on fire protection equipment, locations of fire department connections, fire alarm panels in proximity to the principal entrance. Normally this is provided as an advisement for the development. Additional comments are fire safety plan. Fire code requires that you provide a fire safety plan during construction or prior to construction, and furthermore, prior to issuance of a building permit, we're giving prior notification for the requirement for a fire safety plan. We'll make additional comments on partial occupancy of buildings. The fire code has specific regulations for occupying buildings while construction is underway. We have specific requirements for the protection of adjacent buildings. The fire code has specific guidelines to protect during construction multifamilies, walk-ups, row housing, townhomes, and single-family dwellings. In addition, during a development permit review, if it's noted that you have fuel tank storage facility on premises, we will advise that there is a fire rescue services permit to install fuel tank permits, and it's just a heads up on that. We will require 3 sets of engineered drawings submitted to our office as well. One of the last comments we'll make is that if it's a high-rise facilities, the requirements for the central alarm control facility in a high-rise building. 2 examples of water supply. This is an example of a private water supply where there were no fire hydrants on the property, and the applicable standards needed for a private water supply. Every water supply that we see is different, but we prefer to be consulted prior to, so we have the proper connections so our vehicles can make connection to the water supply. We have examples. The reason why we're offering comment or providing advisements on the location of hydrants, fire department connections, and fire alarm panels are We're representing here in illustrations that if we look to the top left, here's an example of a hydrant located very close to a building under construction where we do not have access because of the security fence. And ideally, we'd like to resolve this issue prior to the building permit. Bottom left is another drawing of a permanent installation of a hydrant, which when connected obstructs the access to the doorway, and again, located too close to the building. If this building is in an emergency, it would not be safe to connect onto this hydrant this close to the building. The bottom right is an example of a fire department connection located by code 3 meters away from the principal entrance of a building, however inaccessible because one of the connections, the Y connection, points towards an adjacent wall, making that connection unavailable. We do ask that fire department connections are identified with a sign, which is demonstrated in the top right photograph. When we advise on emergency planning, 5613 of the Fire Code talks about a site-specific emergency plan that must be available prior to construction of the site. Those fire safety plans get circulated to the Fire Prevention Office for review and possible amendments. These plans are required to be posted on a job site throughout construction. You can reference emergency planning in the Fire Code Stand Data FCI-0903. Additionally, there is a show home agreement that has implications for builders. The show home agreement is signed between a developer and the city. This agreement ensures that there are utilities provided to a site, roadways, water, power, etc. Protection of adjacent building is specifically regulated in the Fire Code. There's a stand data specific to it, FCI-0902. Here's an example of a guideline for protecting row housing and semi-detached. Fire Rescue Services has 3 guidelines, one for the row housing, one for single family, and one for multifamily or walk-up apartments. We suggest that you stay current with the most applicable guideline for the type of project you're proposing. There are advanced notification prior to building combustible buildings and implications of protecting adjacent buildings during construction. As I mentioned earlier, when we discover that there are fuel tank storage systems in a building, Fire Rescue Services will review engineered drawings submissions for the tank installations. These are not covered in a building permit application, but rather specifically addressed through fire rescue. If we're going to take away 3 helpful hints to assist Fire Rescue Services in reviewing the development permit, the most important thing is if you can provide a swept path analysis with the submission. This will greatly assist in evaluating the accessibility of emergency vehicles into the property. The second hint is to consider the availability of emergency access road in an all-weather design and the availability of water supply for firefighting operations in the early stages of design. The last helpful hint are implications imposed by the Fire Code that are not addressed specifically in the zoning regulations nor the building code. Fuel tank permits and adjacent property protection are specifically regulated in the Fire Code. We offer advisements at the early stages to assist you with the development of the project.